Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to the 1.2 trillion plan to rebuild America from one of my favorite channels on YouTube. And I mean, I don't know what this is going to be about, but I saw this pop up and I thought, yeah, this could be a fun little reaction. So we're going to check this out, hopefully going to enjoy. Links are in the description to my Patreon where you can see reactions that I can't post to YouTube. And let's jump into this and see the plan to rebuild America.
Infrastructure. It might be the one thing Americans can actually agree on. Right across the country, roads, bridges, trains, water supplies and energy grids are all failing. And it's something US presidents have vowed to fix for decades.
The bridges and highways we fail to repair today will have to be rebuilt tomorrow, at many times the cost.
Our roads, our bridges, our schools.
It is also time to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure.
America, this is how we truly build back better.
Now, some of those promises might finally be delivered on with the passage of this massive 2,700-page, $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill.
Trillion, like, it's really hard to comprehend how much 1.2 trillion really is. That's a fuck ton of money, right?
America on Main Street and at the dinner table is talking about infrastructure when 20 years ago they didn't even know what that meant.
On this
wow.
vote,
So, how did we get here? What makes this moment truly different?
the yeas are 69,
And will this plan really be enough
the nays are 30.
to save America's crumbling infrastructure?
The bill as amended is passed.
In 2021, the US got a C- on the American Society of Civil Engineers Infrastructure Report Card. For those of you less familiar with the American grading system, that's not great when you're talking about a network that underpins the daily lives of hundreds of millions of people.
Specifically civil engineers, what we do is largely unknown.
God damn it, man. I always forget how loud it is outside the window, so I just try and leave it open, and yeah, it's too loud, man.
Of people.
Specifically civil engineers, what we do is largely unnoticed until something goes really wrong. So, you know, we've kind of been banging the drum, but people are like, oh, I have clean water and my sewers work. And yeah, I hit a pothole once in a while, but that's because the weather changes. And so there's been a lot of excuses because things systemically haven't been failing. They're now getting to the point where the infrastructure, you know, I laugh, it's not a midlife crisis, it's an old age crisis. It's impacting everyday Americans every day.
To understand how we got here, you need to know how infrastructure gets paid for in the US. It varies by project, but typically some money comes from the federal budget, which is controlled by Congress in Washington, D.C., and the rest is covered by state and local governments or private companies. That's pretty different from European countries, who mainly fund their infrastructure through national governments. According to a Brookings analysis, federal infrastructure spending in the US peaked in 1933, as FDR invested in the New Deal after the Great Depression.
President Roosevelt headed for the Capitol by special train to begin planning a $1.5 billion relief program.
That gave rise to programs like the Public Works Administration and projects like the Hoover Dam, LaGuardia Airport and the Lincoln Tunnel. It also tackled some less iconic but crucial upgrades like rural electrification and municipal water systems. Economists say that investment in infrastructure is what helped lead the country toward economic success in the years that followed.
You cannot build a modern economy on a crumbling infrastructure.
There was another spike in federal funding in the late 1950s during the interstate highway era.
For the progress that will keep this and all other American cities alive.
And then again in the 1970s when more comprehensive environmental and community development efforts were introduced. But since the 1980s, infrastructure has made up less and less of US federal funding. Today, only a quarter of public infrastructure money comes from the federal government, leaving already struggling state and local governments to cover more of the costs and the maintenance.
Which I guess that means higher tax for people, right?
Globally, the US has fallen behind other countries. Take a look at this chart showing G20 countries' projected infrastructure spending by 2040. China is leading the pack with just over 5% of its GDP going towards infrastructure. The US is all the way down here at just 1.5%. This new $1 trillion package would be the largest investment in decades, but not quite as big as the spending under the New Deal. Now that we've put this incredibly thrilling and easily digestible bill into context, let's get into what's actually inside of it. Remember, it's 2,700 pages long, so we can't cover it all, but let's start with the basics. Utilities. Every 2 minutes, a water main breaks in the US, and roughly 6 billion gallons of treated water is lost every day. That's enough to fill over 9,000 pools. Meanwhile, safe drinking water isn't a guarantee. Water quality in the US varies from state to state, county to county, and can even depend on which street you live on.
Since 2014, Flint, Michigan has been synonymous with tainted water, a group of largely unregulated toxic chemicals widely used for years is now a growing threat to water safety in thousands of American communities.
The new bill would put $55 billion towards water and wastewater infrastructure. That includes $15 billion to replace lead pipes and $10 billion to address contamination from a chemical compound called PFAS, which is still technically legal to have in drinking water.
I mean, maybe that should have been one of the priorities to do years ago, but I guess at least it's getting around to doing it now. It's a start.
In recent years, widespread power outages have become more common. Blackouts are estimated to cost the US economy billions of dollars every year. To address this, the bill puts forward $65 billion to improve the nation's power grid and invest in things like carbon capture and clean hydrogen. Next up, we have transportation. Only 5% of US commuters use public transit to get to work.
That's so wild to me. I understand now because obviously people drive. So many more people drive in the US. It's just so different in the UK. Like, I'd say a good 50-60% use public transport to get from place to place, especially in like London. Like, I mean, I guess in like places like New York it's the same, because obviously the underground, people will use the underground to get from place to place because it's just quicker and more efficient. Especially having to drive in New York or a major city like that, it wouldn't be fun. But it is wild to me that there's such a different like sort of amount of people. But I do also understand how and why that is the case.
Vast majority of people drive cars. And depending where you live, that could mean dodging potholes, sitting in traffic jams, or navigating buckling pavement. According to the White House, 173,000 miles of America's highway and major roads and 45,000 bridges are in poor condition.
I mean, you're one bad day away from a collapse where a lot of people die.
The bill provides $110 billion for roads and bridges, with an extra $7.5 billion set aside to build electric vehicle charging stations. Meanwhile, public transit systems could get $39 billion, and Amtrak would get $66 billion to improve its 50-year-old rail service. Don't forget, the president is a big fan of trains.
Poor infrastructure costs the average person $3,300 a year, and that might mean, well, your power went out and you lost a refrigerator and a freezer full of food and you've got to replace it. You know, you have a water line break somewhere, you're either buying bottled water or you have boil water alerts.
There's even provisions for the further development and deployment of Hyperloop.
Hyperloop?
While many of these priorities,
what is Hyperloop?
Like roads, bridges and water supplies may seem familiar, this bill represents the first time that both political parties have really acknowledged that climate change is taking a toll on the nation's infrastructure. Tens of billions of dollars have been set aside to address
Look at this flooding, goddamn.
Floods, wildfires and drinking water shortages. But as we know, a lot can go wrong when it comes to infrastructure. The vision on paper isn't always what happens in reality. And these things take time, but the urgency to get things done this time around does feel different.
So I think in a matter of a couple of years, there's going to be a lot of orange cones out there. People are going to see construction in a lot of different areas and will see that their money is going to something in their neighborhood.
America's $1.2 trillion plan won't be enough to solve everything. There's still a gap of nearly $2.6 trillion to catch up with similar countries. But the bill is an historic investment in US infrastructure, and an opportunity for the construction industry to leave its mark on a country for generations to come. If you enjoyed this video and you want to...
Well, there we go. There we go. The importance of construction and all that sort of stuff. It's fascinating how, I guess, like the infrastructure really does have such an importance on a country. I mean, I understand how, obviously, but I don't think this adds up to 1.2 trillion. Yeah, I mean, yeah, probably over doing it a little bit. But hey, let me know your thoughts on this, and has this already started? Because obviously this video is a year old now, so this process should have already started if it has done. But yeah, let me know your thoughts, and until next time, like, subscribe, and peace.